All right, everyone, here we are. It's chapter 26 of No Man Knows My History, Prelude to Destruction. There are some very important elements to the narrative of Joseph Smith's downfall in this chapter, so let's get into it. I think it's very reasonable for the people that were concerned about Joseph Smith that they saw him as a symbol of the union of church and state. That's something that I'm afraid of and have talked about at length in previous commentaries, so you know where I stand on that. I think that anyone that claims that a theodemocracy is a good thing, especially when that person is in charge of the Nauvoo City Council, which we've seen its various abuses in great measure already, I think that is cause for concern. Joseph Smith has a way with words. When he says this, "I can live as Caesar might have lived were it not for a right-hand Brutus. We have a Judas in our midst." He obviously was able to have so much success throughout his life due to his silver tongue. And I gotta give it to him. He drops some nice one-liners every now and then. I think it's important to point out the discrepancy between these two huge detractors of Joseph Smith in the Nauvoo era. There's John C. Bennett and William Law. And Fawn Brodie goes to great length to let us understand that for all of the incendiary aplomb of the rhetoric of John C. Bennett in the Nauvoo, in the Mormonism expose that he published in the Sangamo Journal, William Law is kind of the Dr. Hyde to Bennett's Jekyll. He's a lot more reasonable. All of the things that he's going to critique Joseph for, we can have a lot more certainty about the veracity of those claims. And it's evident by Joseph's response to the events of this chapter that Joseph was aware of that as well. He was able to overcome the barrage of insults levied against him and accusations as well from John C. Bennett because of how bombastic they were. He could just hold them up to the saints and say, "Look how crazy this is. Do you think I would do that?" And they bought it. But with William Law, not the same case, because William Law is just as close to Joseph as John C. Bennett ever was. And when he comes out against Joseph Smith, his words are so much more measured that Joseph says, I can't really do anything about that. So Joseph is pleading for money to build the temple and the Nauvoo house. And I understand that there are a lot of people like William Law that recognize that why are there people basically starving and giving free labor to build the temple when the Nauvoo house is being built? Like, don't you think our priorities are mixed up? The same thing has been in the Christian discourse recently with the criticisms of the group Passion. There's a Passion conference, which I've heard described as Coachella for Christians and Christian influencers. It's like a Christian influencers get together. It has nothing to do with Mormonism, but this is happening in 2021. It's a yearly event from what I understand, and it's been in the news from Christian people talking about it because of their frustrations about the same thing, which is namely that people go to this, they spend money to go to this conference, and then in the entire time they're at this conference, they're having music and inspirational speakers and stuff like that, and every time that they have this elevated emotion, they start bringing around the donation trays and asking people to send a Venmo or drop cash to further the mission of this group. And so a lot of people have been talking about that. So that's what made me think of that. Joseph Smith is kind of doing the same thing. He goes so far as to say that the Nauvoo house must be built. Our salvation depends on it. Meanwhile, people are starving to build the Nauvoo temple. This is just, there's a lot of things that are going wrong financially, and William Law and a lot of these other people that end up doing the Nauvoo Expositor, I feel like speak for thousands of people in Nauvoo. There was probably a lot of people that said, you know what, I've been with Joseph all this time through Kirtland, through Missouri, and he has been the spiritual leader we need. But I think at this point there was a lot of people that were willing to finally admit that for all of his strengths as a prophet, his temporal leadership and especially his financial leadership and strategies were really not up to par, and that was starting to bite him in the back. So the Joseph Smith just can't help himself with these women. William Law, one of the closest people to Joseph Smith, Joseph tries to approach Law's own wife. I looked in the footnote, which I did not read during the chapter, and there are at least 4 or 5 primary source documents confirming that Joseph Smith did indeed try to seduce and bring Jane Law into his circle of polygamous wives. And remember that there were people like Hiram Smith and others and Brigham Young that were totally fine with polygamy and were practicing it themselves. But there were also people like Sidney Rigdon, whose daughter Nancy we talked about, really put his faith to the test. And then again with his close friend William Law, he's going for his wife Jane. You can understand how frustrating that must have been. And these people, like Rigdon and William Law, were not in favor of polygamy. In fact, they thought it was debauchery of the highest level, and to their credit, they never once allowed Joseph to sell them on the revelatory nature of such a policy. They knew it for what it was. They knew Joseph was a philanderer. They called him out for it, and that is the beginning of the end for Joseph Smith. It's fair that William Law is not wholly reassured by the Nauvoo Council in trying to assuage the rumors that the destroying angels had been given orders to, quote, put him out of the way. I can't say I blame William Law for that, given their history and the whistling deacons, these Danites that are patrolling the streets of Nauvoo. You know, the society doesn't exist anymore, but it kind of does, and if you get on Joseph's bad side, it wouldn't be the first time that bad things have happened to people who criticize the prophet openly. So, can't say I blame him. Holy cow, and it just gets worse. There's Robert Foster is a doctor, and it says his grievances strikingly paralleled those of Kimball and William Law. Again, he's another person who realized that the prophet was a good spiritual leader, but did not trust him financially at all. It says, then in one day in spring of 1844, he arrived home unexpectedly from a business trip to discover the prophet dining with his wife. Can you imagine? You're in a committed relationship. Again, I've discussed in previous episodes, I have no problem with polyamory. If people are in consensual and openly communicated open relationships, that's none of my business. But this, I mean, can you imagine if you trust your spouse and it's the only person you trust and you love and deep and you have children together and you come home from a business trip and they are having dinner privately with each other in your home, your spouse? What a betrayal. I mean, that is a betrayal of trust. Even if nothing negative or dastardly was happening, that is still a huge red flag. So, yeah, I mean, Joseph Smith just does not look very good here. So Foster takes his wife at gunpoint. That's crazy. I mean, this dude has lost his marbles, and so he gives his wife a pistol and says, one of us is going to shoot the other unless you tell me right now what was going on. And she said that she did confess at gunpoint from her husband that the prophet had been preaching the spiritual wife doctrine and had endeavored to seduce her. So this is the final straw, and these people start airing their grievances publicly. Foster is brought to trial in Nauvoo, and it says, but when it was learned that he had marshaled 41 witnesses and intended to turn the trial into an indictment of the prophet, a council met secretly in advance and excommunicated him along with William, Wilson, and Jane Law. And this is happening in 2021 as well. In the 2010s, in the 1990s, in 20th century and 21st century Mormonism, all the time you'll see the church issue out church-sanctioned discipline on its members, but when the members have dirt on the church that would make the church look bad, especially in the modern age of the internet, where things can get published outside of the state of Utah's level of awareness, oftentimes there will be secret backdoor deals. I know firsthand of people in my life that were going to face church discipline, and because of the information they knew that they could have leaked to the press, what would have been a more high-profile church discipline became secret, and nothing negative went on. There are people I know people that have dealt with the church in those ways. So the church does not like to have they like to have their cake and eat it too. They like to excommunicate people on their terms and not make it fair, and then they don't like the negative press that comes from it. So Foster's kind of a badass in this sense for being willing to, he's got 41, like, what are you going to do? Yeah, go ahead, excommunicate me, see if I care. I've got 41 people saying, you're going to tell me all of us are like liars and deceived by Satan? I don't think so. This is one of the saddest things I've read in this whole book, is his desperate desire to reform the church. William Law, I believe, is talking about that his desperate desire to reform the church had made him far more formidable than if he had set out to damn the prophet and all of his works. That is so true. So many people have been excommunicated in the last 30, 40 years, 50 years, not because they wanted to destroy the church, but because they wanted to make it better. And that is so sad. There's Sam Young, there's Kate Kelly, there's the September 6 who were excommunicated in the 1990s. And many Natasha Helfer, the sex therapist, that's probably the most recent high profile excommunication. And now you've got people that want to make the church better, and then you've got people that straight up just realize how bad it is. Like recently there was a high profile billionaire, one of the richest people in Utah, announced they were leaving the church over homophobia and other issues. There was a lawsuit brought against the church for a billionaire that wanted their tithing money back after finding out that the truth claims of the church were not as they had been taught to them growing up. Of course, that was thrown out of court. The unfortunate thing is, if you do give your tithing, there's not really much you can do to give it back, but it did generate a lot of negative press, and the church hates that. So it's very sad, but very true, that reforming the church will often make you a much larger target than trying to destroy it outright. And it says, Joseph was not afraid of what the laws might swear against him in a Carthage court, for he knew that they would be hard-pressed to prove him guilty. And it goes on to say that his clerks had followed him for 3 years. They've got minutes for his every step and every word, but that his references to plural marriage had been so adroitly disguised that only the initiated would understand their true significance. So as I was writing my notes for this episode, I laughed out loud, because this would be hard to prove him guilty, not because he wasn't guilty, but because he was good at covering his steps. That's a really important distinction to make. He wasn't calm in the face of going to face a judge because of his innocence. He's calm because he was smart enough to not be an idiot when talking about the very things that could prove him guilty. So you got to give him credit. He is smart. Can you imagine being his scribes, and he'll like say stuff and just turn to them and go, "Oh, this is off the record, boys." That's so weird. I can't even imagine thinking that my life is so important that I need like several people to follow me around and write down everything I say. That's so crazy. Yeah, again, they're playing a dangerous game, right? Because if they want to sling mud back and forth and accuse their accusers, that's going to implicate Joseph in some pretty nasty stuff, and they don't want to do that. So, Joseph says, God knows then that the charges against me are false. What a thing it is for a man to be accused of committing adultery and having 7 wives when I can be found only 1. I am the same man and as innocent as I was 14 years ago, and I can prove them all perjurers. Big yikes. This entire book serves as a resounding reminder to anyone who thought that Joseph Smith was being honest here, that he was lying. That this is a really... this was a public sermon on May 26th that he gave, I'm assuming 1844, and he says, I can prove them all perjurers, and this book is a testament to him being the greatest perjurer of all of Nauvoo. So it's important. We talked about with John C. Bennett and the Sangamo Journal expose of Joseph Smith that the biggest problem with it, and the reason Joseph Smith was able to sweep those accusations under the rug, is even if they were true, they're just so bombastic and so exaggerated that people found it hard to be credible. But William Law, with the Nauvoo Expositor, finds more success because he dispenses with all of the drama and TMZ Hollywood bullcrap, and he goes straight to the source and just says, this is the story. Thousands of people are reading this, have had rumors, and we are here to confirm by multiple signatures and affidavits that this is indeed true. And so, yeah, the Expositor is successful, so successful that it says, when the prophet read the Expositor through, he knew that he was facing the gravest crisis of his life. Yeah, because he can't lie about it anymore. Every single time people have accused him of doing bad things in the press or at the Nauvoo Council or in the Kirtland Temple, whatever, he's always been able to either himself or have someone loyal to him back him up and shut up the people talking against him. But he knows with the Expositor, and he's known the whole time, that almost everything he's been accused of is true. He's just been successful at wriggling his way out of facing accountability. But this is the smoking gun. He knows that William Law is too smart to make the same mistakes as John C. Bennett. He reads the Expositor and knows that the game is up. So, Joseph says to William Marks, who's another person that has become disillusioned with Joseph for his financial indiscretions, says, this doctrine of polygamy, Joseph speaking, or spiritual wife system that has been taught and practiced among us will prove our destruction and overthrow. I have been deceived. It is a curse to mankind. Mormon apologists are quick to assume that Joseph Smith reluctantly took on polygamy from a commandment of God. Like when they talk about the angel with the flaming sword, they feel bad for Joseph. They don't feel bad for the women. They say, look at what Joseph had to go through in this trial of polygamy. But Joseph himself says, I have been deceived, and it is a curse to mankind. So this would show that if it was coming from God, that he was listening to either the wrong God, or that it wasn't from God at all, and that apologetic can no longer be used because Joseph Smith admits that he was deceived. So the angels with the flaming sword telling him to tell women that the gates of heaven would be closed within 24 hours if they didn't marry him on the spot, apparently that wasn't God after all. So very, very, does not look good for Joseph at all. And of course, after years and years of being frustrated by the immoral people in the United States and Missouri and Ohio and Illinois, these courts that have been so vociferously anti-Joseph Smith and anti-Mormon, and so many unfair things have happened. When it's time to put the Expositor on trial, it says there was no jury, no lawyers, no witnesses for the defense. The counselors simply stood up one after another and accused the editors of seduction, pandering, counterfeiting, and thievery. The prophet went so far as to say that the apostate Joseph H. Jackson had been proved a murderer before the city council. So kind of ironic that you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, because Joseph Smith and the Nauvoo City Council basically knows that what the Expositor is. They can't really come up with anything real to say to justify stopping its publication, and they decide to burn it to the ground. But as the book goes on to explain, Joseph saw that he had unloosed an avalanche. Obviously, this was a really stupid decision on Joseph Smith's part, and you'll have to pardon my French, but a phrase that's thrown around in the 21st century a lot is fuck around and find out. And that Joseph did. They wanted to play Wild West frontier, lawlessness. We make the rules here in Nauvoo. Fuck around, and they did, and they found out. And so the people had enough, and this marks the beginning of the end. We have one more chapter that is just simply titled Carthage, so we're going to be talking about the end of Joseph Smith, and then finally there will be a single epilogue, which we'll read after that. If you've made it this far, I salute you. I hope you've learned a ton. I hope you'll let me know in the comments what about this chapter or book so far has resonated with you. Also, please feel free to let me know what you'd like me to read next. I would prefer to try to read stuff that is legal for me to read, since technically this book. I don't own the copyright to this book, and I don't believe it is in the public domain. So I'd like to read some older material so that I can avoid any consequences. But I'm happy to read whatever I can get my hands on, because it's just so important that people can have access to this really well-crafted piece of research. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time.